I think the problem for the city-state today, frankly, is security.
If you can't defend yourself, you can't be sovereign.
In a restless sea of competing nations, the odds are stacked against city-states. Small, vulnerable, and resource scarce, their very existence is a perpetual balancing act. But it's also what drives them to greatness.
When you're small, you got to be better.
City-states are a very rare breed.
My mission is clear: to continue defying the odds and to sustain this miracle called Singapore.
But how long can a miracle last? As a concerned Singaporean, I'd like to know how my adopted home can continue to endure and flourish. To find answers, I'm journeying to a variety of city-states. I'll uncover the secrets of Venice, a former island republic that thrived for over 1,000 years. And I'll visit other modern city-states, the Vatican City and Monaco.
Wow. Many of them are very innovative. All the city-states in the past had to survive, or else they were basically wiped off the face of the world.
As I reflect on their strategies for survival, I'll dive deep into my country's quest to overcome limitations and secure its future.
It was a pretty comfortable ride. Join me for a fresh and insightful look at Singapore's balancing act. Watching all these young men complete their basic military training, I can't help but feel a little bit emotional. Luca, my son, is still quite young, so in about 15 years, this is going to be me sitting in these stands watching him, and I can't help but feel a sense of overwhelming pride knowing that he will be here representing the nation.
I joined the Singapore Armed Forces Volunteer Corps in 2018 to give back to the country I call home.
We, members of the Singapore Armed Forces, do solemnly and sincerely pledge that the honor and independence of our country, with our lives.
Ever since then, it's really deepened my fascination for what it takes to defend a city-state.
I think the problem for the city-state today, frankly, is security. How do you protect yourself when you're in a place like Singapore? You're very, very aware of the security issues.
If you can't defend yourself, you can't be sovereign, because then you will rely on somebody else for your defense. And if that somebody else says jump, the only agency you have is to say how high, sir, and in what direction.
Only 3 city-states remain today: Singapore, Monaco, and the Vatican City. And each city-state has found different ways to defend itself. Located within Italy's capital city of Rome, Vatican City is the smallest nation on Earth. The Vatican's ancient walls stand as its first line of defense. While it has public spaces, access to the Vatican's private inner sanctum is protected by the Swiss Guards. Often called the world's smallest army, they have protected the Pope for over 500 years. I have a chat with one of the Swiss Guards to understand their roles better.
How does one become a Swiss Guard?
First of all, you have to be Swiss. You have to be Catholic, 1.74 m minimum. You have to do your military duty in Switzerland. You have to achieve minimum high school.
He shared that their duties range from the daily protection of the Pope to managing security during major events and papal audiences.
So how does it feel being a Swiss citizen, then swearing your allegiance to another city-state?
We are very proud about it. For me, it's special because we have it as citizen only the time that we are here in Vatican. When we go back, we have to give back to citizen.
While I've gained a new appreciation for the Swiss Guards, there are only over 130 of them, and they aren't a full-fledged military.
Now, the Vatican may have its Swiss Guards, but it doesn't need to maintain a standing army because it is surrounded by Italy.
If you're in Vatican City, you better hope the Italian army has got its act together, because those Swiss Guards are not exactly going to stop the Red Army. The famous line from Stalin, which was, how many divisions has the Pope? Which was none.
And it's a somewhat similar situation in Monaco. Monaco only has about 120 soldiers. Their primary duties include taking care of the prince and also guarding government buildings. For its military defense, though, the city-state relies on France. Unlike the other modern city-states, Singapore depends primarily on its own citizens for its defense. Our approach to defense stems from Singapore's unique historical experiences.
David, we're here at the old Ford factory, which is the location where the British had surrendered Singapore to the Japanese on the 15th of February in 1942. How did these events shape Singapore's views on defense?
Well, events on that evening ushered in about 3.5 years of the darkest years in Singapore's history. Singapore's founding fathers lived through the Japanese occupation and never forgot those hard lessons. And my sense is that that episode taught Singapore a very valuable lesson that you can only rely on yourself for national defense.
Singapore's belief in self-reliance only grew stronger after merging with Malaysia in 1963. The merger was meant to secure Singapore after British rule, but tensions with Malaysia and Indonesia's konfrontasi exposed its weaknesses.
Singapore is out, cried the headlines. This and the proclamation of Singapore signified the separation of Singapore from Malaysia and its emergence.
When Singapore separated from Malaysia in 1965, Britain became its main defense partner, but they proved unreliable yet again.
Towards the end of the 1960s, the British had announced that they were withdrawing their forces east of Suez, a large part of which were actually based in Singapore, Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, and also the British Land Forces. That accelerated the push to develop our own defenses through the national service system.
Since its independence, Singapore has been committed to developing the Singapore Armed Forces, SAF. Mandatory national service began in 1967. The city-state boasts a technologically advanced Air Force, Navy, Army, and digital and intelligence services. The military's acquisition of high-tech equipment has gone hand in hand with improving the skills of its professionals. After decades of operating second-hand submarines, the Republic of Singapore Navy has introduced state-of-the-art, invincible-class submarines manned by highly trained crews.
As a maritime nation, Singapore's survival and prosperity depend on free and unimpeded movement over the seas.
Located in northern Italy, Venice was a maritime republic that defended its trade routes with a powerful navy. I'm sailing into the heart of their naval stronghold, the Arsenale, to meet Venetian historian Alberto Tosofe.
We are now in the very heart of the Arsenale.
How fast could a boat be built here?
The workers were able to build ships in few days. All the naval power of Venice was born here. Its extension is 1/5 of the whole town. There were moments in which 16,000 people were working here. Blacksmiths, carpenters. It's the most ancient assembly line in the world. In few weeks, more than 100 ships could be set inside here. This power helps Venice to maintain its predominance in the Mediterranean area. And so huge capital invested here to build ships to protect the trade exchanges, where a kind of two legs that permit to Venice to run across more than 1,000 years.
Like the Venetians, Singapore has invested in developing its own defense industry. It grew from assembling imported arms to designing and producing its own rifles and armored vehicles.
Today I'm really excited because I get to go into the belly of the beast and experience a hunter up close. The Hunter is the Singapore Army's first fully digitalised armoured fighting vehicle.
It features a powerful integrated system with smart controls and automatic targeting. These digital cameras provide the crew with a 360 complete view of its surroundings, enhancing situational awareness.
It was a pretty comfortable ride.
In 2024, the Hunter armoured fighting vehicles debuted in Exercise Wallaby in Australia. They took part in live firing drills and manoeuvres alongside Leopard tanks, showcasing their precision and combat readiness.
If you look at the regularity of exercises, the component training nationally, and the larger exercises overseas, the fact that they are realistic as well, that sends a signal that this is an armed forces that people take seriously.
Military defence is consistently one of the largest items in Singapore's government budget. Singapore's 2024 defence budget was around $15 billion. It ranks among Asia's top 10 defence spenders and leads Southeast Asia. But I wonder if future generations will be able to prioritise defence as much as we do now, with an ageing population and a lower birth rate.
We do not live in the most salubrious neighborhood. Our neighborhoods do not love us dearly. They are polite to us. Why? Because we have a strong defense. Therefore, you have to spend some amount of your money on defense, even as we will need to increase social spending due to an aging population.
A strong defence also depends on a strong economy. When the economy of Venice waned, so did its naval might.
No money means no money to invest in a new ship, to invest in innovation.
When the Navy was no longer as strong as it was, the economy then suffered, and ultimately, so did the Republic.
Venice's problem was, as it became an empire, Venice maybe got a little too big for its britches, and at some point, much bigger countries called their bluff.
Its decline was attributed partly to its many conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, so you have to have a defense force. But it is not in preparation to have conflict with your neighbors, but to ensure that people respect you and respect the sovereignty. Diplomacy, I think, is key.
The landscape of Western Borneo bears the legacy of various self-governing Chinese associations known as Kongsis. Among them, only the Lanfang Kongsi founded a government that functioned like a republic. This centuries-old temple, once a Lanfang Kongsi outpost, is where I meet Ahmad Sofian, a researcher of Lanfang's legacy.
Lanfang bukan kongsi yang terbesar, tapi hari ini kita mencatat bahwa Lanfang sebagai kongsi adalah kongsi yang paling terkenal. Ada pola relasi yang dibangun Lanfang untuk menjadikan kongsinya itu lebih kuat dan lebih bisa bertahan lama.
In West Kalimantan, north of Pontianak City, lies the township of Mandor. It was once the capital of the Lanfang Republic. The land around Mandor bears the scars of centuries of gold mining. In the late 1700s, the Lanfang Kongsi battled other Kongsis for control of this region's riches. Remnants of this gold mining heritage still linger today.
Selamat siang, Pak.
Ya.
Apa kabar? Cari mas ya?
Iya.
Saya bisa cari mas?
Iya, bisa.
Saya duduk sini ya.
Kasih air.
Kasih air sedikit.
Gini. Kasih air.
He makes it look a lot easier than it actually is. If I shake it out, you can kind of see that I have a tiny, tiny bit of gold there. I did it, guys. I found gold.
Securing gold allowed the Lanfang Kongsi to fund defense and diplomacy, forging alliances with rivals, native tribes, and the Malay Sultan to delay Dutch colonial expansion. But as their gold reserves dwindled, their diplomatic clout faded.
You very quickly realize that if you've got nothing to bring to the table, you don't deserve a seat at the table. And that's when things start to fall apart.
Yang kedua, ada penerapan pajak yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah kolonial Hindia Belanda. Itu yang juga menjadi salah satu penyebab pada akhirnya Kongsi Lanfang dibubarkan.
Lacking diplomatic leverage, the Lanfang Kongsi resorted to force to resist Dutch taxation. This prompted the Dutch military to defeat the Lanfang Kongsi in 1885. Ending its century of autonomy.
That's the purpose of diplomacy, to try to reconcile different sovereignties. But in the end, if two sovereignties collide, there's only one way to resolve the collision, which is by force. That is why force and the threat of force is never far behind the surface civilities of diplomacy.
For small city-states throughout history, mastering diplomacy has been key to their survival and advancing their national interests. Venice was known for producing skilled diplomats, and Marco Polo is one of its most famous figures. As an envoy for the Mongol Empire, he bridged cultures between East and West.
Venetians were ready to be sent into the world. They knew languages, they were curious, and they traveled all around the Mediterranean area, Northern Europe, Africa, East and Far East. And more than this, from a certain moment, they decided to found the diplomatic post everywhere. This is a Venetian invention.
Alberto, tell me a little bit about how extensive Venice's network of diplomats was.
It was pretty extended. Where a Venetian merchant was, there was an ambassador and an embassy. Venetians were able to take advantage, political advantage, diplomatic advantage, but also military advantage. Because when you are there and you know how many soldiers, warships, armies, it has knowledge is an advantage.
The moment Singapore became an independent city-state in 1965, it swiftly established its first diplomatic missions in Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, and New York City. As of 2024, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs reports that Singapore maintains over 50 overseas missions worldwide.
If you're a small city-state, it is very important for you to know what's going on in the world around you. Singapore will never be an island. What I mean is that you cannot insulate yourself, so that either you can take advantage of opportunities or get out of harm's way in good time. But you can't do that without a diplomatic network.
Though Vatican City is a walled enclave in the heart of Rome, it remains far from isolated. Instead, it has an extensive diplomatic network. Surrounding the Vatican City, you'll find over 80 embassies to the Holy See, the governing body of the Catholic Church, and the Vatican City. To better understand Vatican diplomacy, I speak with the Holy See's Foreign Minister, Archbishop Paul Gallagher.
We have relations with 184 countries. It's very fundamental to the very identity of the papacy. Popes over the centuries have always had relations with kings and presidents and other rulers.
And how do the Pope's visits to Asia and Singapore in particular help to complement those diplomatic strategies?
Any official visits, whether it's by a pope or by a president or a king, is part of one of the instruments that you use in maintaining a relationship, deepening a relationship. And it also gives you opportunity to message to a people, to the local church, and to leaders. So it is a very important part.
Through the global influence of the Catholic Church, Vatican City's diplomatic reach isn't hindered by Italy. In contrast, another city-state has had its diplomacy limited by its dependence on France. Near France's southeastern border with Italy lies the coastal city-state of Monaco. After World War I, Monaco signed the 1918 treaty with France, trading some diplomatic independence for military protection. At Monaco's foreign ministry, leading diplomats share how their diplomatic reach was restricted until the Principality signed a new treaty in 2002.
La politique de la Principauté de Monaco devait être parfaitement alignée avec les intérêts de la France. Et en matière internationale, en matière d'affaires étrangères, Monaco devait s'entendre préalablement avec la France dans toutes les actions que la Principauté voulait mener. Alors ce n'est plus le cas aujourd'hui, donc le traité de 2002 a fait évoluer ces choses-là.
For example, the ability to have ambassadors accredited to the Prince of Monaco, which was new and which has been booming because now we have, I think, 130 embassies, ambassadors accredited here.
I think Monaco has really tried to maintain its sovereignty, has tried to exercise their rights. But I think when you are a small city-state and you are so reliant on an external party for your defense and for your protection, then I feel like you kind of have very little say.
Singapore's diplomatic autonomy is underpinned by its ability to defend itself, and its defense and diplomacy are enhanced through collaboration with a range of defense partners.
There is such a thing as defense diplomacy. Anybody that wants to work with us in defense, we will work, provided it's in our interest. Our closest defense partner is the US and its allies and its friends. Why? Because our interests are aligned and they are better than us. If we want to improve our defense, we have to work with them.
I said that the right time for defense leaders to talk is any time.
And I invite him now to deliver his address to the 5th plenary session of the Shangri-La Dialogue.
You would realize that we host the Shangri-La Dialogue yearly. We also have bilateral and multilateral frameworks which allows the Singapore Armed Forces to train with countries not just in the region, but overseas as well.
Defense and diplomacy complement each other. If you don't have a strong defense, diplomacy, nobody's going to take you seriously. We don't go around poking people in the eye just to see what happens, you know. But we will do what we must. We have stood up to the US, we have stood up to China, we have stood up to Indonesia, to Malaysia. Not frivolously, but when we must. That's also an attribute of sovereignty.
But sovereignty for city-states is also tested by their lack of resources. How can they depend on others for vital resources without risking their autonomy?
It's a challenge to our sovereignty because water is life and death, you know. If you don't drink, you die, right?
Throughout history, city-states have had to negotiate being dependent on larger neighbours.
The Vatican City gets all of its water from Rome in Italy, which is technically a separate country. But back in 2017, they had to switch off all of the fountains, including these in St. Peter's Square, because of a severe drought affecting Rome.
We buy the water from Italy and we buy the electricity from Italy. So you're very aware of that dependence and that relationship. You don't produce much of your food in Singapore. You have to import it from elsewhere. But it's not a bad thing to recognize one's dependence. If we want to be totally independent, if we have a notion of sovereignty that is like that, then it's not really being realistic.
Singapore is a hungry city-state with over 6 million people and a growing demand for food. We've set ourselves a big goal to produce 30% of our nutritional needs by 2030, using just 1% of Singapore's land.
With limited agricultural land, we import nearly 90% of our produce from 180 different countries and regions. So that means we are not reliant on one single source.
We are a global city where our hinterland is no longer Malaya or Malaysia, it is the world. But what was left was water.
To understand how dependent Singapore is on Malaysia for water, I meet the Deputy Chief Executive for Singapore's National Water Agency.
Today we import water from Malaysia under the 1962 agreement between Singapore and the state of Johor. This agreement entitled us to draw 250 million gallons per day of water from Johor. And this is about half of the current water demand.
This 99-year water agreement with Malaysia has been a cornerstone of Singapore's water supply, but an occasional source of tension.
I think it is manifestly ridiculous that you should sell water at 3 cents per 1,000 gallons.
Former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad sought to renegotiate the water agreement on multiple occasions.
And you cannot change international agreements unilaterally. To put it in Singlish, cannot suka-suka change just because you don't like it. Huh? It's a challenge to our sovereignty because water is life and death, you know. You don't drink, you die, right?
Singapore isn't the first city-state to navigate challenges importing water from its neighbours. Geologist Luca Zagia shares how Venice was once an island republic surrounded by rival powers who controlled water sources on the mainland.
They had to rely on themselves because getting water from the mainland would have been dangerous for the risk of attacks or poisoning. So they wanted to have an independent source of water in the city.
Venetians designed rooftops and special open squares to funnel rainwater into an underground filtration system made of sand and stone. The purified freshwater was collected in large waterproof cisterns, which Venetians could access through wells.
And the number of wells is about 600. This supply of water was enough for the whole population, about 150,000 people.
The way the Venetians collected rainwater reminds me of how Singapore uses over 90% of its land area to catch rain and collect water. Rainwater collection was once our main way of diversifying our water supply. That's why our reservoirs and waterways are so precious to us. But we don't always appreciate them. I volunteer to clean up the Singapore River together with Eugene Heng, founder of the Waterways Watch Society. They use hands-on activities to educate citizens on the value of our waterways.
So Eugene, what do you remember the Singapore River to be like?
This is the ground for all the tongkangs and the bumboats who will come and do all their trading. And most of these boats, in fact, all the boats didn't have toilet facilities. And at low tide, you know, you are not spared the smell and the picture shot of what's left behind, and it can be pretty gruesome.
In the 1970s, a monumental decision was made to cleanse the Singapore River and the Kallang River. A decade-long endeavor with a price tag of $300 million. Once the waters ran clear, a new question arose: how to transform this abundant flow into the lifeblood of the city, clean, drinkable water.
20 years later, a dam was built to separate the Marina Bay from the sea. Completed in 2008, the Marina Barrage cost $226 million. The barrage released salty water back into the sea, while rainwater gradually flushed out the remaining salt, turning the Marina Bay into Singapore's largest freshwater reservoir.
Unlike Singapore, the city-state of Monaco has been blessed with 6 natural spring water sources that can make up to 30 to 50% of their water supply.
So what is this?
This is a swimming pool. No, this is the tank that all the sources full, and we've got 1,000 cubic meters stock.
But their local water sources are under threat. Together with the CEO of the Monaco Water Authority, I journey to find one of their oldest underground springs.
Mr. Nadi, where are we now?
We are in the cave of the source of Volabelle, which is the first source of Monaco. Unfortunately, there is no more water in this source. So it's very beautiful, but we don't use it anymore to treat water and to produce water here.
Why exactly is it so dry now?
It's so dry now because the climate change is in action. The second reason is that there were works outside that had an impact on the source. The situation used to be very comfortable. We had many resources, different resources in France, in Monaco, and today it's over. We must be very careful with water and search for new resources and alternative resources.
So in Singapore, we do reuse our water as well. Is this something that Monaco would like to move towards?
Yes. Yes, because there is no choice, I think. The water flowing out of the wastewater treatment plant is one with the most capacity.
After decades of investment, Singapore has become a global leader in water reclamation. That's the process of purifying the used water in sewage and producing high-quality water known as new water.
We have 4 sources of water: local catchment water, the imported water from Malaysia, new water, and desalination water. We call this the 4 national taps. Should any of the tap be disrupted, the other 3 taps can be stepped up to meet the shortfall in supply.
Today, reclaimed new water meets up to 40% of Singapore's water needs, but new plants are underway to support ever-growing demand. Principal engineer Magdalene Munn guides me through the construction site of the Tuas Water Reclamation Plant.
We had to go deep with all the tunneling works, going down to the bottom at 78 meters deep there. These huge pumps will be pumping the used water into our treatment facilities.
When you're underground, but still afraid of a massive drop, almost 80 meters down, my heart is actually racing.
Magdalene says she expects the project in Tuas to be completed in 2027. When the plant is operational, it won't just boost the supply of reclaimed new water, it will do so in a way that's remarkably energy efficient. In these digester tanks, the waste solids separated from the sewage will be fermented to generate flammable biogas, which can be used to power the water plant.
The biogas from here will be conveyed over to our next door NEA's integrated waste management facility, where they will be using the biogas to generate electricity.
So that is remarkable that you can actually make energy in this manner. It's so crazy to think of that, but it's also kind of like Singapore's largest fart collector.
Yeah, and it's 38 meters tall. As Singapore's first integrated waste management treatment facility here, we are also fully energy self-sufficient.
The Tuas plant builds on the success of its older sister, the Changi Water Reclamation Plant, completed in 2008. These plants are critical to Singapore's deep tunnel sewage system, a massive island-wide network that channels used water for treatment and recycling.
The deep tunnel system helps to ensure every drop of used water is collected, treated, and purified in a endless circle.
This over $10 billion project, built to last 100 years, strengthens Singapore's long-term water resilience against climate change and rising demand.
Without that existential threat of having our water supply dry up, we would not have invested in new water. We may not have thought about recycling our wastewater, but we did so.
Because of new water, the supply of Singapore water in Singapore can now be sustained.
For a city-state that has been backed into a corner frequently, innovation has been key, and that has allowed us to survive.
The city-state may master water purification to ensure its sovereignty and water security. But can the island city-state overcome limited land and rising seas?
Land reclamation has been a challenging diplomatic issue because it's not something any country can do unilaterally.
For centuries, city-states have pushed the boundaries of their limited land by advancing into the sea.
Luca, where are we exactly now?
Oh, we are on the marsh areas that is closer to the center of Venice. This is the best place to see how things started. How was the place before Venice was built?
What on earth possessed them to say, I see a place which is half underwater, let's build a city here? I'm very confused.
Well, they had no choice. All the other countries were enemies. They needed the protection of water around the city. That's why they came here. And that's where they became really ingenious, because they found a wonderful way of building foundations in such places.
Venetians reclaimed land by driving timber piles into soft marshland, creating a stable foundation. Planks and limestone were laid on top, forming the base for much of Venice. In this way, Venice grew from a 1 square kilometer settlement into a city nearly 7 times its original size. Land reclamation has also played a crucial role in Singapore's development, significantly expanding its land area over the past 2 centuries.
This is water.
With former national sailor and artist Charles Lim, I explore Singapore's eastern coast, which is busy with land reclamation. Charles has a lifelong fascination with land reclamation because he grew up in a coastal village next to a reclamation project, and as an artist, he spent over a decade examining land reclamation processes.
So how much land has actually been reclaimed in Singapore?
Singapore has expanded more than 25% of our original land's mass, actually. It's probably the only country to have expanded in that size without war in a peaceful way.
Charles takes me to view some of Singapore's easternmost land reclamation sites on Pulau Tekong, right next to Malaysia.
I look over and I see rolling hills, and I know for a fact that that is not Singapore.
Yeah.
What are some of the sensitivities of being so close to some of our neighbors?
I think this area, actually, Tekong, there was a court case, actually. There was an issue between Malaysia and Singapore about the reclamation that was happening here, actually.
Land reclamation has been a challenging diplomatic issue because it's not something any country can do unilaterally. It has a huge transboundary effect, which has to be taken seriously, and it has to be discussed between countries. Before you do any land reclamation, you have to do an environmental impact study to make sure it doesn't have undue deleterious effects on your neighbors.
Biodiversity along our coastlines will be affected as we reclaim land. So it is a trade-off we've had to navigate. In order to create more space for our own users, we have had to pay the high cost of reclaiming land.
Initially, Singapore relied on hydraulic fill reclamation, dredging sand and silt from the seabed to create new land. Facing environmental concerns and a sand shortage, Singapore adopted empoldering in 2016. It is a Dutch technique that builds concrete walls to enclose an area, which is then filled with excavated earth instead of sand to create new land.
This whole area is fascinating. Charles, what on earth is going on?
This is part of the poldering project in Tekong. All these trucks that come out from all over Singapore, from every construction site, and they pay for their material to be taken away, and they get loaded up on these barges, and then the barges actually move to Tekong to be part of the poldering project.
Don't think it's until you actually witness the lines of trucks in the volume of sand and soil that is being used that you actually begin to understand just how much of a priority reclamation is for Singapore and how much we actually need to do it.
Singapore is reclaiming land urgently to address land scarcity due to urban and population growth, and to mitigate the impacts of rising sea levels caused by climate change. Like Singapore, Venice's reliance on low-lying reclaimed land heightens its vulnerability to flooding, a threat worsened by climate change and rising sea levels. Luca and I sail out of Venice to the edge of the lagoon, where a seawall protects Venice from the sea. They call it the Murazzi.
We are walking just behind the seawalls that protects the Lagoon of Venice from the waves. The seawalls are 5 meters high and 16 kilometers long. That would be terrible if we didn't have the seawalls and the barriers. In 2019, for example, the last storm surge, the water flooded the city, and 95% of all the appliances of restaurants and hotels, which is the main business of the city, at the first floor were out of use.
Since the 2019 flooding, Venice's seawalls have been renovated and reinforced, with breakwaters and beaches added to soften incoming waves. At the heart of these defences is the Mose project, a feat of modern engineering designed to both shield the city from rising waters and permit the flow of ships in and out of the lagoon.
We are in the middle of the inlet channel of Malamocco, one of the 3 inlets that connect the Lagoon of Venice to the sea. Here it is exactly where the Mose barriers we have in the lagoon.
The Mose system protects 3 lagoon inlets. It consists of 78 hollow steel gates that normally lie flat underwater, but rise with compressed air whenever extreme high tides are forecast, forming a steel barrier against flooding. In the heart of the Venetian Arsenale lies the Mose's high-tech control center. Here, I meet Giovanni Zarotti, the director behind this project.
Il sistema nel suo complesso è costato all'incirca 6 miliardi di euro. Il Mose è un'infrastruttura di tipo strategico e la sua vita è di 100 anni.
The sea walls and gates near Venice remind me of a potential mega project back home, Long Island. The Long Island Reclamation Project aims to create about 800 hectares of land off Singapore's east coast. This initiative will protect against sea level rise, enhance flood resilience, create a new reservoir for water security, and provide space for future development needs. I meet Hazel Koo, the director of the Coastal Protection Department, to better understand Long Island.
The reclaimed land for Long Island forms the continuous coastal defense. Other coastal Measures could also include coastal barriers as well as tidal gates and pumping stations, just like the one that we have here at the Marina Barrage.
But this project does come with a fair amount of concerns and trade-offs. Land reclamation will affect the environment and disrupt sea sports. I speak to an influential member of the sailing community.
How would Long Island impact you and your community?
Long Island is a project which I think it's great because it stops the water from destroying whatever coastline we have. But I believe we have to work together with the government to make sure that this Long Island project doesn't hinder outdoor sea activities.
There's opportunity for us to, introduce new recreational and water activities within the water body. And we will also be having conversations with members of the public, with the businesses, and with sporting associations as to what they will want to see in terms of activating the spaces within Long Island.
While Singapore's Long Island plan and the Marazzi in Venice are separated by centuries and geography, I think there might be some valuable lessons we can learn from these 280-year-old seawalls.
So when we got to Marazzi, you could see that people have actually built a life on the seawall, built a life around it as well, including large green spaces, recreational spaces as well. And I guess this is something that we can look to for Long Island, a potential future for us where we can live, work, and play on it as well.
There are many competing interests. Our resources are finite, and some of these resources need to be invested in future infrastructure, future needs. So we need to balance these needs very carefully.